And I've got a lady sitting next to me, a very special lady. Her name is Rachel.
Hi.
She's the very special lady who married yours truly, host Eric of Talking with Famous People.
Hmm.
She and he represent a true internet love story that'll go down in history in the annals of internet love stories, including Hansel and Gretel meet at OnlyFans, Romeo and Juliet um, do anal on Pornhub, and other such beautiful love stories that have gone down in history. Helen of Troy gets catfished. These are some of the great love stories of
Yeah,
internet
it
history.
is.
Anyway, the story of Rachel and Eric will go down in such history because it's not the first proof positive that talking with famous people is a good place to meet your significant other. We've got lots of examples through the years, including other marriages besides this one. Two other marriages I can definitively tell you about besides this one. Who knows how many marriages have occurred in which it never gets back to me, you know? Two people meet on here. Once they've met each other, their real purpose for being on here has been fulfilled, so they have no other further reason to come around here. I might never hear from them again. You know, it could be dozens of marriages for all I know. Regardless, what questions matter most? Or, if you prefer to phrase it this way, what question matters most? I'm actually asking that question today without any particular answer in mind. Usually, when I pose a question like that, I do have an answer or at least a musing directionality in mind. In this case, NSM, or as they say in the youth culture, not so much. Um, I would say one could reasonably anticipate, now that I turn my attention to the question, that you can get a variety of possible kinds of responses, but an infinite variety. So you get meta analysis, in other words, critiquing the question as a possible response, or understanding better what the question means. You could get a response that tries to describe the kinds of questions that matter without articulating any particular questions that matter most. Or you get a kind of response that articulates specific questions that matter most and presumably justifies why those answers are to be preferred. I think that really that really covers all their possible ground, because if you're saying that there aren't any questions that matter any more than any other questions, then that's a meta critique, or it's critiquing the question itself rather than answering it, right? So, because it's saying actually this question is predicated on a faulty assumption, namely that some questions matter more than others.
Yeah.
So, so basically, any answer you can conceive of that's responsive to the question falls into one of those three categories. It's an answer that addresses it directly by giving specific questions one might ask that the person answering the question is affirming are the most important questions, one or more specific questions. Or you get an answer where somebody tries to provide you the kinds of questions that are the most important questions without providing any specific phrasing of any of those questions. Or you could have somebody critique the question itself. And the fourth possibility is non-responsive, non-topical, in other words, no link at all. I think that kind of pre-work that can be done before attempting to answer a question, for me anyway, is always very informative. I would suggest that others would find it informative as well if, when facing a new question or resolution, which is a question formed in this form of a statement for the purposes of argumentation, well, when I ever encountered like a new resolution in coaching, my first order of business would be to kind of figure out what kinds of arguments are going to be favored by either side, and then worry about the specific arguments, right? So in this particular instance, since I'm actually seeking answers to the question from others and or myself, rather than understanding how it might be affirmed or negated, because it's a question, not a resolution. And the equivalent to trying to figure out what kinds of arguments are going to land on each side of the thing is trying to taxonomy all the possible kinds of responses that might be given to the question. And as I said, those are critique the question, answer it with kinds of answers, or answer it with specific answers. Yeah, specific questions. Of course, as we discussed a little bit the other day, I think is significant enough an observation to be worthy some repetition. Why do I exist? Why does anything exist? Is there a purpose? Can it be known? If not, what forensics can I perform to collect clues or indicators so I can make an educated guess? So I would say that why do I exist? Why does anything exist? And is there a purpose? Are all formulations of basically the same question. Does life, excluding my or whatever, does life have either a meaning or a purpose? So I think those first three questions are formulations of the same question. Can it be known is a different question, because in that case, I guess you need to make the distinction between why do I exist and why does anything exist. So in stating the next question, can it be known, I guess it makes clear why you've distinguished between those first three things, even though the answer is going to be referent to the same fundamental underlying question. But the reason to make the distinction is because when you ask, can it be known, then it becomes clear that knowing your own purpose is more feasible, provided, in other words, that you can be certain and wrong, and that wouldn't look any different than being certain and right, presumably. This business of asking questions and answers is good in a school. In reality, nobody needs any answers. Well, I'm not claiming I need an answer to the question. I am informing you that I would like an answer to the question. And I mean literally in the moment. I'd like people to answer the question. So as I indicated, there are only three possible kinds of answers. Critique the question, which questions answer most. That's what you provide here at Manny John. Provide an answer that explains kinds of answers, or provide an answer, kinds of questions that matter most, or provide an answer that provides specific questions that matter most. Those are the three possible answers. You chose answer one. The thing about people who choose answer one, in this case, is it's more or less impossible to critique the question, which questions matter most, by doing anything other than rejecting the notion that we can understand and better engage with things. Did you have a proclivity toward dishonesty in your young adulthood? No, I would not say so. I mean, maybe like in dealing with high school shit, I was frequently dishonest in dealing with authority figures, right? If somebody had authority over me, I felt like it was always justified to lie to them um, because the playing field's not level when it comes to speaking the truth. Like the secretary in the office, it's easier for her to uphold a standard where she doesn't need to lie to me because I have no power over her. But I don't take that kind of a primitive approach to lying now that I used to, where I felt like it was fine to always lie to people who had power over you because they weren't operating in a fair environment fundamentally. It's like they force or what if you have an answer to that question, Manager John? Um, they force they force their frame on you. It's like, why do I need to tell you the truth about where I was fourth period? If I tell you the truth, I'll get a truant. If I make some bullshit up and get it excused somehow by a teacher, then I won't get a truant. If you want me to be honest, remove the consequences. Because you're not asking me to be honest. You're trying to do an investigation of me in which you can justifiably conclude that meow happened, but I don't have any right to remain silent, right? It's like I can't say I refuse to answer your question about where I was fourth period and have the matter resolved in my favor.
No. I like that. I admire that. I was like, oh, I didn't lie to, like, I'm not sure. I used to lie as a kid.
I mean, I'm sure I lied some as a child too, but it's like I learned fairly early on that I couldn't really get away with it.
See, that's so good because I like it was a lot of shame. Like I felt like I didn't like who I was. Like I felt very shy and very weird compared to my peers. So in order to feel like I was cool at all, um I would like let people have this idea of what they wanted or what they wanted me to be and let that like I didn't stop it.
Well, you didn't say, hold on, my subjectivities need to be determinate about who I am. You're just like, actually, I have no idea who I
Yeah, yeah.
am. The best question anybody can ever ask is, where's my next meal coming from or who's going to pay for it? Well, as I indicated, Benny John, what do you do if you have an answer to that question? Because I agree that having an answer to that question is very important, but also that once it's answered, uh, that answering it is simply a necessary precondition to answering other questions or considering other questions. And for most of us, that precondition has been met or is met most of the time. A judge can only judge on whatever he is presented with. Well, one would like it to be the case that judges only judge on what they're presented with. But having had a plenty long career as a debate coach and as a debater, I can tell you that sometimes judges simply don't do their job. I've watched judges uh, score the round in favor of one team because they agreed with that team's position on the thing and disagreed with the other team's position and explained why the neg was right, listing a bunch of reasons why the neg was right that the neg never said. So they're judging on shit that was never presented in the round. I've seen that happen plenty of times. So we'd like it to be the case that judges can only judge on what they're presented. Unfortunately, they often bring stuff from outside into judging things, right? Ideally, you don't want to let your own biases, preferences, subjectivities interfere with the job of judging things. But a lot of people can't seem to don't seem to get the job exactly. What it is. You are judging on what the debaters say in the round only, not on how it compares to what you believe. That boy class says he learned the opposite lesson. It's really easy to get away with. I'm trying to undo that learning in my 20s now. Well, I'm a bad liar, like Selena Gomez. She and I share that commonality. I think it's because we're both turtles in Korean Vastic astrology.
I just like fucking need.
I'm not teasing you, darling.
I didn't think that you were, but I looked at because I years ago read the synastry thing between Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain, and I thought it explained the reasons that it said that it wasn't a good relationship, but actually I looked at their birth charts, and according to astrology, they have pretty good astrology and some combinations that we have.
Wow.
So
the only difference between them and us is that you're not going to kill me.
Yeah. So wait.
But that's a joke, okay? I'm not accusing Courtney Love of murder. I'm just expressing my totally unsubstantiated opinion that she did it.
That's my opinion too. But what's up with the letter? The letter they found.
I don't know. What did the letter say? Was it a suicide note?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I mean, he wrote all kinds of stuff that could be interpreted as a suicide note.
That's true.
Let's see here. Coneman 3 says, "Oh, you on again?" I am. Oh, you on again? It sounds like some urban slang thing, right?
It does.
And Coneman 3 asked, "Did the drive job go well?" Well, it went very quickly, as it entailed me simply pouring 2 bags of gravel on this one spot and then realizing that I was tragically short in my estimate of how much gravel I would need. Hence, Rachel and I went to the town and purchased 2 more bags of gravel, which I have now added to the car and brought home with me, but not yet put onto the area over there. That may be something that I do in the coming hours. I will finish the graveling task with 6 bags of gravel. Now in total, 2 of them already poured, of course. I believe I can get to the end of the mud tire tread. What would you call that? Like track. That's what it's called. Track. I think I can get through most of it with the amount of gravel we now have. So that'll be something exciting that we can talk about more later. But in the meantime, I'm feeling pretty good about just going to get that additional stuff I needed. It does feel good getting jobs like that sorted. The drive into town is about 45 minutes. Maybe a little less, 40. When there's no cone putters,
Yeah.
Right now there are no cone putters. So, and in this whole county, how many stoplights do we have? That's right, 0. 0 stoplights in the whole county, so that helps. But it is not a particularly fast road that we have to drive on from here to town, and
Mm-hmm.
it it's a decent distance. It ends up taking about 40 minutes. So, round trip, I'm looking at an hour and a half to town and back. Whereas if I'm just going to Bootjack, which is not really a town, it's just really a gas station and mini, like a little market thing, um, then it's an hour round trip. So it's an hour round trip for me to get cigarettes, in other words. But hour and a half all the way to town. Of course, you can only get gravel in town. They don't have gravel at Bootjack. While we were there, we had lunch for the first time in a place called the Hideout Saloon. And in the Hideout Saloon, we had barbecue sandwiches. She had French dip. I had a barbecue sandwich. No, hillbillies. Well, sort of. They're sort of hillbillies all over. We have a we have a few California California hillbillies, you might call them, in Mariposa County. Uh, but Mariposa County is an unusual place for the state of California, and
It's just like when you're talking about like eating soft food or eating the soft bread because of your teeth, like it was great because she laughed and I noticed that like she had a missing tooth.
mm,
I was like, we fit in here so well.
yeah, right. Um, so we do have a certain amount of hillbilly ish kind of population in Mariposa. Not the whole county is super nice or anything. It's not very gentrified. It's like the town's pretty boutiquey and everything
Mm-hmm.
and quaint and all that stuff. But the county is not especially gentrified. It still has a substantial amount of agriculture going on in it, but it concurrently has this kind of vacation home population, like live where we live. Although for us, it's our year-round home. A lot of these houses around us are vacation homes that get rented as vacation
Mm-hmm.
rentals or whatever else.
Yeah.
And then you've also got kind of some low rent districts in the county as well, like where we went down to look at that house where there were all those cars and stuff, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And so you might call those people hillbilly ish. But technically, hillbillies are from the Appalachian Mountains, I think.
Is that? I didn't know that.
I believe so.
Oh, I had no idea.
Not like film Wrong Turn though. Uh, I've never seen that film. I'm assuming it's got some sort of deliverance thing going on in it. No, I never feel unsafe around here. West Virginia, is that the Ozarks or the Appalachians or the Great Smoky Mountains?
I'm sure that the Appalachians go through Virginia.
Yeah, I think West Virginia is mostly the Appalachian Mountains or Appalachian Mountains, depending on how you pronounce it. Uh, Deliverance, I think that takes place in the South, right?
Yeah, I believe.
And so those you wouldn't really you might call them like swamp people or whatever, but you're not likely to call them hillbillies because that's they're not around any hills.
So cool that the Appalachian Mountains is where the hillbillies are from. Like
Well,
Appalachian
I could be
Mountains.
wrong about that. It could be the Ozarks or the Great Smoky Mountains, but I think it's the
Uh,
Appalachians. It may
well,
be all three.
it runs north and south. So it starts like I think part of the Appalachian Mountains is in New York,
Hmm.
and then it goes all the way down to like South Carolina or something like that. So it would make sense for hillbillies to be from the Appalachian Mountains, because
In New York, hillbillies are called people from New Jersey. New York, hilarious joke. I'm not wrong though, right?
no, you're. I hate to say it because I forget that I have family that lives there, but yes.
Well, you know, every place has that little bit of snobbery going on. Like in Los Angeles, uh, some people refer to Fontana as Fontucky because you know it's like way out in San Bernardino County, you know, where uncivilized people live. The USA has a sense of mystique from UK perspective, probably due to combination of size and all movies based there. Well, yeah, I mean, I get that feeling because I have that sense for New York. You know, New York has a kind of mystique to it because I have seen it almost entirely in TV shows and movies my whole life. Although I did visit there once, it was a long time ago. And so for me, I was saying to Rachel this just a couple weeks ago maybe. New York has to be the most Christmassiest place in the world. I get that feeling of kind
I
of
I
mystique.
I want you to have that like I want you to have that experience so badly. I don't know why. I just like because like I want you to have that experience. You deserve it.
Well, I can imagine having a fair amount of fun making shorts and stuff in New York.
Oh my god.
Like we could we could act out a couple Law and Order scenes on some classic New York sidewalk in front of a hot dog selling guy in a bodega or something.
um
Rachel grew up in Long Island, which is
yeah.
close to New York City, but is probably not considered part of New York City because it's the suburbs on an island. Long Island is not the same island as Manhattan.
No.
But she could get into Manhattan without a particularly long distance journey.
Mm-hmm.
I think you took the train, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Took the train to get to New York City.
Yeah. It was really fun. I'm like scared now though. My brother and my mom kind of got me scared because they're like Penn Station has turned into like a piss and throw up station. I'm like, oh man, like
Just like the New York I remember.
that's what I don't want you to experience.
From back from in the 80s.
Oh, I don't want that for you.
Um, well, you know, the thing is, whatever shade of New York you get, it's been highlighted by some decades movies and TV shows.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, there's some decade when New York, I remember it even being featured in the Saturday Night Live beginning back when like Bill Murray was on it. When there's this street that had all these like peep shows and stuff with all these blinking signs.
Times Square was like that.
Well, I bet that street's not even there anymore.
If it is, yeah, it probably isn't. Like, yeah, cities go through phases.
Yeah.
They do. So it's, but
Cone Man has a bet. Cone Man bets many people in USA only have vacations in their own state and never leave it. Well, I don't know about that or not. I think it depends how big the state is you're in. You know, in California, that's a lot more feasible to vacation
Stay.
only within your own
Stay.
state
Yeah.
because California stretches up almost the whole West Coast. And you've got all kinds of different things in California, from freshwater mountain lakes and streams to desert to off-roading to ocean fishing to skiing to um, I don't know what else is there. You've got amusement parks, you've got major cities, etc. So it's feasible to only vacation in California.
Yeah, it really is.
But if you're living in Delaware or something, there's zero chance you're staying in state for a vacation. Stephen King made New England interesting. Well, New England is an interesting place. For America, New England, New York, Virginia, those parts of the country have sometimes substantially more history, American history, than, say, where we live now. Like Mariposa County was first settled by American citizens, you know, 120 years ago or something. Not a super long time ago, beginning in 1900, something like that. Arcadia, same thing, was originally part of Lucky Baldwin's estate back in around 1900,
Mm-hmm.
and then he started developing around it. Prior to that, it was just wilderness. So we have a very short history in the U.S., and therefore, for us, places like Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, certain parts of New York anyway, like some, I don't know, what's that place called? That's not in New York. It's called, old timey Williamsburg.
Oh,
Williamsburg Colonial Village.
yeah, so fun though.
Like
Oh
that's
my
just
god.
that place is great, but it's as far back as you can go in American
That
history
is as far back, yeah.
until you get into Native American history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as far back as you can go in colonial American history, and it's only um, 250 years ago. Whereas England, it's like 250 years ago, you start getting into the interesting antiques on Antiques Roadshow in England. If you watch the English Antique Roadshow, yeah, I could carry a gun. I mean, I don't have a handgun. And if I did have a handgun, I would not probably wear it around in a holster.
I have a confession. I told this to Ruben.
What's that?
Um, like when we went out shooting, like I didn't know, like I don't know, I didn't put two and two together that you were gonna take some shots, and I like had a moment of freak out, being like, "Oh my god, a gun just went off. Where is Eric? Is he okay?" Like I like freaked out.
It sort of occurred to me at kind of as I was pulling the trigger, like I should probably tell them I'm going to do this because I kind of it came to mind that that might happen actually. But sorry about that.
It's okay.
So one of the questions that Cone Man 3 thinks is the most important question, a question that matters most is, can you carry guns where you are? Yes, we went out shooting with Ruben and Acacia out into the wilderness, but I don't have a handgun. And even if I did, I could probably get away with wearing it on a holster around here,
Around here, yeah.
but it would be weird.
But oh, that's so weird. So you can
People would assume I'm a cop, probably.
you can wear a gun in your holster in Mariposa, but then on the other hand, you have like a kid yelling out the window, being mad about you smoking a cigarette. Like what? It's so weird.
Well, I mean, I guess you could make more of an argument that smoking a cigarette is more of an imposition on other people because it gets into the air. I guess you could make that argument, but and the thing is, I would say that the point is almost nobody walks around carrying a gun around here.
No, they don't. It's very safe.
At the same time, probably most of the people around here own a gun and may take it out to the wilderness sometimes.
Yeah, we hear guns. Not not recently. I haven't heard them, but
Yeah.
in the warmer weather,
Yeah,
And
we'll hear gunfire occasionally. You can tell when someone's just off firing guns rather than shooting anything because you hear way more gunfire than you would if somebody were hunting.
yeah,
Someone's hunting, you hear one shot, maybe a second one.
like just a really good example of like the type of vibes that you get from the town is like exactly this sort of story that Eric told about me being in the hardware store saying happy holidays and the guy saying we say Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Um, Joe Media says, why did everything start and why? Because there can't be nothing. What is nothing? Is nothing black? Is it white? Is there such a thing as nothing before there was something? Those are pretty universal questions, pretty important questions. Um, why did everything start? Or really, the question that we have to ask before we ask that question is, did everything start? Is there a beginning? Scientists, namely astrophysicists in particular, say there's a beginning because that's the source of all the energy projecting everything outwards away from presumably some center point, right? Uh, um, so that does suggest that there was a central source of an initial force going away from a center, right? Presumably in all directions equally. But that's not actually a reason to presume that that was the start of things because that's just as far back as our tracing of events can go, right? Well, I mean, different people have different perspectives on that, Cone Man. Uh, I believe Stephen Hawking's final conclusion on the matter was that it's a endless cycle of collapse, expansion, collapse, expansion. But really, the jury's out. The math can't possibly indicate either way because, as it stands, the math requires us to make up a thing that exists, but that we can't directly measure at all to account for all the missing mass in the universe called dark matter. Well, we have no reason to believe this thing exists at all. You know, the when you appear to be missing a lot of funds in your accounting books, you don't make up imaginary funds to fill the gap and say, well, there must be imaginary funds somewhere that are just as real as these real funds, but we just can't measure them at all. Obviously, dark matter is silly, you know. Am I referring to Gödel's incompleteness theorem? I'm not sure what I'm referring to. I'm just referring to the idea that somebody, Stephen Hawking's articulated it near the end of his life, but he may not have been the one to. I'm not saying he was the one to come up with the argument. I am saying that he articulated before he died that he believed it was an endless cycle of expansion and collapse. I don't know what Gödel's incompleteness theorem says. So if the universe stops expanding eventually and collapses eventually, then presumably it will expand again because, you know, obviously as the collapse accelerates, the pressure and heat increases because you're packing ever more mass into an ever smaller area, right? Or the same amount of total mass into an ever smaller area, is what I should say. Porcupine tree minus dark matter equals porcupine tree. Good point. Good point, Hero Lamb. Is all of this just a dream? No. I can clearly distinguish between when I'm awake and dreaming. This is not a dream. Dreams are not this realistic, etc. They don't have this kind of narrative continuity either. If you think about the size of the universe compared to us, isn't the size of an atom the same number of powers to the 10 smaller? Um, I don't know. Maybe. If what you're saying is that human beings seem remarkably along the midline of possible scales, I've heard that before. It's true on the planet in terms of life, right? Like, we're in the middle between blue whales and uh, let's call it, let's say ants. We're in the middle somewhere, approximately. But I've thought about this observation before, that this notion that we're somewhere like on this midline of things. I mean, first of all, in terms of like animal scale on Earth, we aren't near the midline if you include microscopic creatures potentially, or if you don't, then we're still a lot closer in size to an ant than we are a blue whale. Additionally, animal scale is specific to its field. So, scaling considerations of airbound creatures are different than scaling considerations of waterbound creatures, different than scaling considerations of land-based creatures. So I'm not sure about the premise that we actually are on the middle of this thing, of the in these various ways, because because I really think it's dependent entirely on how you frame out your observations.
I like to think that there are different versions of us in different galaxies or planets.
There's another Rachel in some alternate universe that's very similar to you, but somewhat different.
Yeah, like you know how they have that in Rick and Morty? Like
Yeah.
in several of their universes, there are different versions of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I. That's what I think.
Well, when we're telling stories about alternate universes and different versions of a person, what we're really telling is a story that says, um, if time didn't move forward in one direction, I could have lived my life in a million different ways, turned out a lot of different ways. The thing is, it's an appealing notion, but I just think it's fundamentally counterfactual. It's like, unfortunately, we're stuck with who we are and our unrealized possibilities from earlier in our own life when we might have had the opportunity to become somebody different will forever remain unrealized. It is only in our imaginations that we can conceive of a universe where another us lives a different life,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In another universe, me and Chomsky are running for the presidency together. I'm running for president. He's my vice presidential candidate. We're raising hands, or I may be his vice presidential candidate. Oh my God. What a horrible universe that would be. But I mean, come in, you think Chomsky's an INFJ. So
he's not. No way.
if you think we should listen to
I never
Chomsky,
say any of those things.
and people like him, then you're not referring to INFJs that you think we should listen to. Yeah, it definitely also depends on the INFJ in question as well. In that, I think, and also the circumstances, right? If an INFJ is informing you about certain kinds of things, and you can reliably assume they aren't toxically projecting their shit onto you like Corey does onto me, then you can be it'd be a very good idea to listen to your average INFJ, assuming they're telling you about certain kinds of things in certain kinds of contexts, right? In other kinds of contexts, you should not listen to them because maybe um, they're using, holistic intuition to evaluate things that need a different attentional approach. Just, it's important to let everything, to the extent that you can, allow it to succeed first on its own metrics, provided it establishes those before challenging the legitimacy of those metrics. So it's like, if someone makes a utilitarian argument, I first am going to address whether their impacting of it is correct. Well, first of all, that's wrong. What you say is factually wrong in terms of impacts. And maybe I'll say it's factually wrong in terms of impacts because you've not accounted for these harms, and to genuinely impact out your prescribed plan, you need to do an impact calculus that included harms, not just benefits. I might say that. But then I'll move from there up a level and say, more importantly, we shouldn't be using this utilitarian calculus here at all because the point in question that comes first is legitimacy, and that's not been addressed. Something like that. I can't read right now. Oh, wait a second. I believe I have my reading eyes right here. Let me read it with my reading eyes. Then I'll be able to see. Oh, they were there the whole time? I mean, the thing is, you aren't in another universe, obviously, because you are here. If you were in another universe, you couldn't also be here. So it must be somebody else. In the alternate universe construction of like Rick and Morty or something, it's somebody else who's more or less identical to the person you know in the show with one quirky character change, They were there the whole time, Rachel. I knew I brought them with me. I kept feeling on my pockets and I never felt right here. I fall asleep on, but often wake up odd dreams and feel crap most mornings. You fall asleep on what? On top of a bed of nails? There's your problem, Cone Man 3. You should sleep on a mattress instead. Most of love I slept okay, but not feeling good today. Most of life, you mean? You slept okay, not feeling good today. Well, one of the nice things for me about losing sleep is that once I reach a certain point, my body invariably adjusts. In other words, it goes, okay, now you have to sleep a whole bunch because you've lost a certain amount of sleep for this consecutive number of times. Now you're going to be super tired and have to crash out for like 16 hours, Struggling with motivation in life. Boy, I feel you, brother. I'm not especially inspired or motivated in my moving through each day right now. And that can be an area of ontological concern for sure. It's not just you're not just whining. We all need to feel concern regarding our overall fulfillment and well-being. And being a slacker is not ultimately good for one's self-concept, I don't expect. Although for some people it's more consistent with their self-concept, like more consistent with their self-concept is less susceptible to critique in that area than others. Like I don't think either ISFJs or INFJs feel any particular need to be productive, having to do with TE polar probably. But for action types, I think we generally have a sense that we ought to be doing something, right? Doing something specific, doing something that's either creative, probably like ESTPs feel like they should be doing something creative. Uh, ENTPs feel like they should be doing creative things impactfully. ESFPs, I don't know, it's harder for me to articulate what their general thing is because, with ENFPs, ESFPs, you've got FI as the tool function. So I don't really, it doesn't universalize as well as TI types motivations might universalize because obviously FI has the most direct, particularist, and non universalist link to what's important to you subjectively. I was thinking earlier about my weird relationship with the chat. Like what keeps me interested and engaged in a live stream a lot of times is being able to respond to different things that are said in the chat. And certain kinds of things that are said in the chat can be successfully provocative, which is to say, can provoke a response, but I don't like feeling like I'm being provoked. In other words, I don't feel like I'm being led around. So it's like I enjoy being led when I don't feel as though anybody's leading me. And I don't think that, you know, stuff that's provocational is necessarily leading at all. That would depend on the perception of the person engaging in it, I guess. Anyway, it's a complicated question. A lot of anime protagonists seem to be SFP types. Well, there are a lot of well, right. I mean, I find plenty of things that you've said, Kunman 3, provoke a response from me. But I'm not really sure how much you're consciously choosing to do that. Because if you're just trying to engage me and you measure engagement by whether or not by sort of the uh, passion of the response or something, then I wouldn't call that leading me because you'd be only just you'd just be in that case attaining engagement as you understand it. But if on the other hand, for example, you you came in as with a concept of an identity you wanted to craft in mind, with the intent of demonstrating like how you figured out how to work my triggers such that you can predictably anticipate this outcome with this trigger, etc. And you're trying to, I don't know, like prove the question to yourself or demonstrate to somebody else or something. Well, then that will qualify as leading. I understand that there are plenty of people in the world who are capable of treating a communicative event like that. In other words, trying to remove themselves from the actuality of the communicative event and pursue some agenda beyond the scope of the communicative event. But I'd like to think that I could manage my habits of response in a way that doesn't require me to know the intentionality of the person chatting. And usually I can, but I'm always susceptible to being caught somewhat by surprise by things. It depends how emotional I am, I guess. Well, I'm not just talking about you, Conrad. You're a convenient, like, very recent example, I guess, but uh, you're not nearly as provocational as some people I've engaged with in the past. So I don't mean to say that this line of thinking is just about you. This line of thinking links to my checkered relationship with the chat. On the one hand, I like there to be things that are of interest to me raised as topics, and what's most likely to get response from me is when those topics are raised as claims being made rather than, you know, questions and or observations related to cognitive functions or typology that aren't directly making claims about typology, which is there's such a class of things, but um, you might say something like, I see people who prioritize being likable as being more susceptible to getting pushed around or something like that. Well, that's an observation about reality that's accurate enough and that is best explained with cognitive functions, but it's not specifically about cognitive functions at all. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that line of thinking. I decided to live stream when we got home because, well, watching TV sounded kind of boring. The football game I was considering watching was getting out of hand, and definitely not in favor of the team I was rooting for. So, I additionally wanted to mention that it's possible, not impossible, more than a very low percentage of probability that I may go to the so-called Yosemite open mic tonight at 7 p.m. is when it starts.
That fucking makes me so nervous.
Well, you don't have to play with me if you don't want to.
Aww.
If you want to ease into the process without with just going and I can play a song or two by myself, that's totally fine. It's up to you.
That might be good, easing into it instead of We'll see.
Yeah, and I inadequately keep that sort of thing in mind, Conman, which is that when people come in here and are talking about their understanding of typology or cognitive functions, they're reasonably coming in with a reasonable assumption that this is a shared topic of interest between the two of us. But because I have very because I battled in this wasteland called typology for such a long time, I have rather strong opinions about it. And when others come in and talk about typology or cognitive functions, and I hear them using C.S. Joseph language or other bullshit terms and stuff that I know very well to be bullshit, I forget that as far as these people coming in now, they're talking about the same thing that I'm talking about. It's not until some time around here that they recognize that um, the subject's not discussed in the haphazard language that other people discuss it with around here. And because my claim is and remains, it has been for a while, that my perspective on cognitive functions is exclusively correct, not just that I'm right about it, but that which is not consistent with my framing and stuff is wrong. Um, Obviously, I run afoul of a lot of people who are just probably interested in coming in and talking, sharing the topic that we both presumably are interested in, cognitive functions, and discussing that a little bit. And I tend to see the way people go about doing that as just a painful reminder of the cancer that the chemotherapy of the truth that I provide is failing to kill. Where Martin Sheen kills, spoilers, Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga is going to be in a new Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix.
Can you explain how you think each position in the stack manifests? 1 through 8, obviously. Well, I would say that when we talk about a cognitive function stack, we're saying a person's nature is their first slot function, their way of being themselves is their second slot function. All the other slots are how that individual's relationship with other possible ways of paying attention is conscribed by those first and second slot functions. So because I'm an NE DOM, my fourth slot function, SI, which is the alternative to NE and is somewhat exclusive of it, but is also a necessary component of NE. So NE is about divergence from an expected outcome. It's about disparateness. SI is about familiarity. You know things by SI by repeating them to yourself verbatim time after another until it gets hammered into your head, right? So those two things are, in terms of values, at direct odds. In terms of mechanics, extroverted intuition can build particularist divergence with particularist experience. So if I want to change a story we all know into something that's a little bit more unique, I might start off with a story about a girl who visits a house in the woods which has 3 bears in it. But then I might want to say, oh, that sounds too much like this other story. So I'll say, and this girl, she's got a brother who's really into coaching volleyball. And he coaches girls volleyball. And He likes to go to baseball stadiums. Well, I'm talking about Rachel's brother now. So I'm adding particular element from my SI stuff I already know to make it differentiate from the universal explication of that story, right? So, in other words, with any in the first slot, what that means is that SI in the fourth slot is is subordinate to the values and interests of extroverted intuition, such that instead of archiving the things I create, I'm going to create new things, more new things. Instead of practicing the song I've already done, by nature, I'd rather just freestyle new songs all the time. Except I've come to understand that it's like there's no direction in that to have. So I've begun to practice my songs on a regular, many times I live stream. So the relationship between your first and fourth slot is one of subordination, and we can best understand your relationship with your fourth slot as being twisted or conscribed such that it's in service of the dominant, and you can describe your relationship with the fourth slot additionally as it's something you feel comfortable being self-deprecatory about. You don't feel it's important to be good at that, really, and you don't feel bad if people point out that you're not good at it. So that's a relationship with fourth. With third slot, it's the scorecard function where if you feel like your first and second slot function are successfully expressing who you are or manifesting the self, then it'll validate against your third slot function. So for an INFP, for example, if their FINE is really working well, it's going to validate across SI grounds. In other words, they're going to always be comfortable, feel like they're in control of their own experience all the time. They can reliably assume that their experienced knowledge base is adequate to know what needs to be known. They're going to be asked less frequently to utilize NI to, they're going to be less constantly in NI requiring circumstances. Anyway, that's your scorecard function, is your third slot. Your fifth slot function is the absolute value for which you judge the outside world. If somebody else doesn't validate across against your fifth slot function, you're not going to have very much respect for them. It's an ignoring function, as socionics says, but it's reductive to call it ignoring because it's really just like the fourth slot twisted in, instead of being subordinate to your first slot and used mechanically by it, it's above your first slot in terms of an absolute value. Ultimately, you're not going to feel good about yourself. You're not going to be a good expression of yourself if you don't validate across against your fifth slot absolute value. Toxic people, I have a hypothesis, are people who don't validate against their own fifth slot value. Sixth slot you call countervalued. I call it critical parent, as some people do. You could call it demonstrative, like socionics does. It's kind of all those things. It's the most conscious of the unconscious functions, and it's where you turn to keep your third slot scorecard clean. So because FE is my scorecard, I'm much more likely to try to figure something out myself than to ask for help because I've got a childish understanding of FE. I don't have a nuanced understanding of it where I recognize that there are big social benefits to asking others for help. It's not just, you don't just gain social benefits by not imposing on others. There's a more nuanced relationship with others than that.
They say that if you do a favor for someone, they're more likely to do a favor for you back.
Right. But also the thing is, if you ask somebody to help you with something, depending on how they understand their relationship with you, right? It's like nobody wants to be on always one side of the equation of like who's being helpful and who's receiving help. Uh, you see it in anime all the time. Some character who's like, my goal is to get stronger so I don't have to rely on you so much,
Yeah.
And their goal is to have that other person rely on them sometimes. If you're not engaging in some sort of calculation of that reality when making FE decisions, you probably have fairly childish FE like I do. But seventh slot, blind spot, is notable in that you can be attacked in that way, not basically have any defense for it, which is why I like socionics term polar. And an example of this is that I was in a relationship with a BPD person for 2.5 years. She continually made efforts to hurt my feelings in a variety of different ways for almost the entire time. But I continually responded to each of those critiques as though I should deal with it detached from the intentionality of the person saying it and evaluating on its merits. So I'd say, no, that's not true, or, well, maybe there's some truth to that, but, or yes, that's true, I acknowledge it, I'll try to change, or something like that. But what I wouldn't say is, hey, motherfucker, you're just hurting my feelings all the time. Stop it. Because I'm FI polar. Eighth slot, I would say, is notable in that it's you might call it, in your own mind, it's a perfectly balanced function. You don't want anybody else telling you what to do in there. You don't want your toes stepped on in your eighth slot function at all. And it's also a defensive function because you feel as though you've got it balanced perfectly, more or less, and that the world validates other expressions of it than yours as preferable. But it's also your most unconscious function, which is to say, you're least likely to remember instances of paying attention via that attentional manner. Why did they take down your Eric clip channels? I never told them to take anything down. They didn't ask me about it. Usually it'll pop up as a copyright thing. It says, this person's clipped all or some of your video. What do you want to do? I have a list of them. I can look at right now even. I never do anything with them. Huh. I guess they must say it's repetitive content or something like that you're not uploading anything new. But it's weird because they encourage you to clip shorts of your own shit as ways of promoting your channel. So I don't know what to make of that. As far as I knew, there was nothing wrong with people making a close channel. That's unfortunate. You're doing something that I appreciate, and then they're like, you can't do that because of Eric, probably. Well, maybe it's not because of Eric. Maybe it's just because they've got that rule against uploading the same thing multiple times or whatever. Boo, YouTube. Terrible job. That's how you start a meaningful conversation with somebody. You begin by saying, boo, insert name, terrible job. That way they're sure to be open and receptive to what you have to say. It's looking pretty cloudy. It did say we were going to get some rain tomorrow, but wouldn't shock me if it starts raining this evening. Were it to do so, I suspect I would remain thoroughly unshocked.
I'm just gonna wait for him.
So if I do decide to go play this open mic, I'll need to leave here in like 3 hours. And I might end up I mean, it's more likely to happen tonight than usual because, wait, is today Thursday night or Friday night? Today's Friday night. Never mind. That's no open mic's on Thursday. Today's not Thursday, it's Friday. Right? Well, there goes that whole idea. Just toss that idea right out the window. Because today's not Thursday, it's Friday. So then that whole line of thinking I was going to go down just nicks it off the flow right now. But I will include this part of that line of thinking. I'm planning, although I'm still not certain about it for Sunday, but I'm feeling pretty certain about it for tomorrow. I'm planning to not take Adderall tomorrow, and maybe not take it Sunday either, so that I can, have better return on my Adderall ingestion. When I start taking it again on Monday. That's my goal. Rachel pointed out that Sunday night is New Year's Eve. If we're gonna have any hope of staying up till midnight, we'd have to probably take it on Sunday at some point, at least half of one. But there was some talk potentially of Ruben and Acacia coming up here. You make a good point. I could go to the Friday closed mic. There is a closed mic on Friday, I believe. There's a band playing. So, anyway, we had never been to this hideout saloon before because, understandably, given both the appearance of its sign, the name on it, etc., I assumed it was just a bar. I have no reason to go into a bar. But we saw an advertisement in the local newspaper that informed us that, in fact, the Hideout Saloon serves food and is even all ages, As long as you don't go into the bar spot, I guess, like sit at the bar, you could go in there and order food. So that newspaper ad made me realize that, hello, doggy. Made me realize that maybe we should go to this place, especially since I saw they serve breakfast all day and they serve food until 2 in the morning. So it's the only place around here where you could potentially go out for a late night meal. And that's something that Rachel and I might conceivably want at some point, So when we went into town today at Gravel, I said, hey, let's alter our plan today. You know how I was going to go buy all-purpose gravel? We're going to use some of it for out by the mailbox, and we were going to eat some of it. I've got a new idea. Let's use all the gravel by the mailbox, and let's eat at the Hideout Saloon. So we did, and that's when we saw the sign, Yosemite Open Mic, and we looked at it, and it told us that it was, we looked at a different sign, and it told us that it was on Thursdays at 7. But it wasn't until just now that I realized, wait a second, Eric, today's not Thursday. It's Friday. PE clothes go home. And that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. It was really spectacular. One of the best stories I've ever told. And I've told a lot of stories in my day. So next week, maybe Ruben will be in town and he can play something at the open mic too. I don't know if Ruben plays open mics or if he has any songs to play or whatever, but it's an open mic, so there's fairly low expectations from everybody except me. I vociferously boo everybody at the open mic doesn't meet my high standards. No, I'm just kidding. I don't boo people at the open mic. I wouldn't do that. That would be unnecessarily mean. They have karaoke on Wednesdays. We discovered that today too. So, it was a pretty educational trip to the Hideout Saloon. It's a cool place. It's all the walls are covered with dollar bills that people have written things on and that they've then taped up to the walls, I guess. Just floor to ceiling, all the walls and ceiling, all the surfaces covered in dollar bills. So that was kind of a cool decorative approach. Well, whatever you feel like doing, Ruben. I do karaoke. I know you're not asking me, Lou, but I enjoy karaoke, but it depends on the state of my voice too. Like when we did karaoke at the wedding, my voice was really shot. I couldn't really sing anything. I would guess, based from my chat engagements with him, that Carlos Paiva is either an INTP or an INFP. I don't know which. I guess he's a deliberative type. And I'd guess he's not an ISTP or ISFP. So but that's just my guess from the chat. Obviously, I can't be definitive typing people from the chat. It's just too hard. Because I can't factor in a lot of things. ESTP and ENTP best at lifecraft? I mean, I'm not exactly sure what lifecraft is, but if it's living a mindful life in which one does purposeful things, then I would have to remove ENTP from that list.
I called Delilah to see how she is doing. She didn't answer, but I figure she's probably resting.
Yeah, probably. Or when did you call her?
Like maybe 20 minutes ago.
Okay. She'll probably call you back or text you back or whatever. If people who know MBTI usually think I'm an INTP, but I score very poorly on SI tests. Oh, well, in that case, maybe you're not, You are no type. Goodbye. Are FI users more likely to believe in free will? No, I think that probably TE links to determinism somewhat, but TE would like people to be like dynamic physical systems where they're comprehensible as via a set of ordinated interface engagements with the thing. But people are not just you know, non-sentient, unique physical dynamic systems like the things TE is concerned about. How about SE third free will link? Look at all the impacts I do. I picture it, then it happens. Well, I mean, I picture it, then it happens. If we assume I picture it, therefore it happens, then you're still placing your own action, decision making, behavior at the beginning of the causal chain. Determinists place your behavior, decision, whatever, at the end of a causal chain that they can't articulate. There's an intuitive leap there that ought not be made, namely that because we can articulate, because I can successfully predict that if I do meow, you're going to react like this. Therefore, every behavior of yours is responsive to some set of infinite possible stimuli, all of which impact you in non-determinate ways, but collectively which eliminate your free will. I mean, certainly Jung intuited a massively important notion when it comes to understanding human consciousness, but it's also notable that he did a poor job of explicating it. I mean, still, give him credit, he did plenty of the work. He did maybe the hardest part of the work, which is intuiting that this architecture exists and explains things. But you wouldn't say that he did, you might say he did as significant intellectual work as Einstein and Tesla, but you couldn't say that he did as clean intellectual work. Not nearly as clean. Well, I have remembered it on a couple of occasions and realized that that it hasn't arrived. So I will confirm for you that it did not arrive.
See, Carolyn, what you just said there makes you a perfect contestant for Naked and Afraid. But what's the point of life if you're not playing for real?
How do you go through life not doing impactful, meaningful stuff, though? Then, from my view, you'd be wasting your time. Do you avoid doing impactful stuff? But what's the point of life if you're not playing for real? I mean, do I avoid doing impactful stuff? I don't know if that's accurate or not. I would say that it's easiest, most effortless for me to be me, do this, and that's not very impactful. This is an interesting question. Does sanity owe to knowledge, or is it the other way around? No, I don't think sanity links to knowledge, deliberation, action, interface. I think that sanity, like most things in human consciousness, tracks across two specific vectors: particularist experiential things and your nature. So I do believe that people whose particularist experience is whose circumstances and experience are not conducive to being rewarded for who they are, In other words, the more your nature faces ontological assault from the world, the less likely you are to express that self sanely. You might say that Corey's not expressing himself very sanely right now, but it's not because he's not sane, it's because he's he's facing way more toxicity than he could possibly metabolize in a healthy way. And and then there's the other kind of sanity that's more universalist, like schizophrenia, bipolar mania, real mental illnesses that link to psychotic breaks and stuff. They seem to be probably more of a function of biologics. Um, in other words, reality is implicit to your nature slash being rather than linking to your experiences. However, I would also say that it's no doubt the case that people, in my opinion, people with mental health issues experience those mental health problems much more dramatically when they're in circumstances that are treating it like a discipline problem rather than a mental health issue. So you don't have to be knowledgeable to be sane. Sane behavior, being perceived by others as sane, perceiving yourself as sane. Uh, well, I would say that it's a default, right? Very few instances of insanity, at least in their initial expression, express as self-awareness about one's uh, uncertain mental health, right? Many people just don't care at all for others. I mean, I don't really think that's the case. Do you?
What's the question?
Oh, many people just don't care at all for others.
No.
I think the majority of people do care for others. They just perhaps do a terrible job of understanding others, is one thing. You know, it's like it's the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. The platinum rule, which says do unto others as they would have you do unto them, is a pretty universalizable rule. The golden rule, unfortunately, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You end up with a bunch of TE DOMs TEing you when you don't like it at all, right? Like Rachel's mom tries to love her by ordinating plans and duties and obligations and tasks and stuff. And sometimes her help is very helpful and much appreciated by me, but in any instance, that's not how Rachel's going to understand love as being properly displayed or shown by somebody. You don't you don't love people by trying to make them more like you want them to be. And I think Rachel would probably say that that runs directly afoul of her understanding of love.
Yeah.
But a TE Dom, they're going to say, well, I mean, what's the point of living if you aren't improving yourself all the time?
Yeah.
There are some people who are happy to exploit others with no idea it's wrong or not feeling guilty, but I would say those are a very stark minority of people. Uh, by and large, if you were raised by even mediocre parents, you're going to have some sympathy, empathy, guilt. It's a pretty integral part of being a human being. So, well, yeah, there are some truly evil individuals who do knowingly and willfully exploitative things and then laugh as they profit from the exploitation of others. I think those kind of caricatures of evil are pretty rare. But that could be overestimating their awareness. I don't know. You can see examples like Kim Jong Un or Putin, who both of whom clearly just, I mean, I don't know how you could be Kim Jong Un and drive by all these slaves that you made your entire country, you know, doing slave labor for you and starving and stuff without having some sense of self-reckoning. But obviously that's not how the Un family goes. It's more often not caring than laughing. So we can we can understand well enough how somebody might, if they lack sufficient intuition, might promote a, a policy or practice occurring far away from them where they can't observe it at all, that ends up being exploitative or whatever, and their lack of intuition just sees the problem in terms of profit, solvency, and whatnot, and doesn't recognize the larger picture concerns. But I also think it's fair to say that those people persist in those behaviors not because they don't care, not because they're laughing as they're satisfying their greed with their exploitation, but rather because they're too dumb to recognize that what they're doing is exploitative. They're just trying to work within a very singular frame of reference that says, I'm trying to solve this problem, produce more revenue, and that's as far as my thinking goes. Right. I'm saying Carlos Paiva. I think it's much more likely to be what I'm describing rather than not caring or laughing about it. Right. It's much more likely in almost every instance that what's what's explainable by either evil or stupidity is in almost every instance preferably explained by stupidity, more accurately explained by stupidity. You've really got to be sociopathic, I think. Sociopathic, and additionally, uh, you might say, like FE sociopathic too, because ultimately, if you're a bad person who's doing bad things, the more people in general become aware of that, the more you face antagonism from random people in the world, you know? So there are naturally occurring uh, negative feedback loops, so to speak, that prevent it usually from getting too out of hand. So you kind of got to be broken on a couple different dimensionalities to play out as a fully empathetic sociopath. Well, okay. I I'll agree with you there, Carlos Paiva, that it agrees obviously a lot on context. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you can tell a story that makes it just as much sense, like I just did, of somebody locked in their frame, maybe they've had poor work performance lately, they feel like their job's on the line, and they're just scrambling to generate something that they think is a profit generating proposal, and the thing they generate, when you reflect upon it, reveals that there's kind of a skeevy aspect to it or something. Well, whoever is generating that probably isn't nuanced enough to reflect on that other component, right? Well, yeah, probably a majority of Israelis. In post biblical days, they're normally called Israelis rather than Israelites, but I like your use of Israelites. I appreciate that. Um, I would say that that obviously most people in Israel, like most people in Palestine, like most people in America, like most people in Britain, they have a difficult time detaching from what they believe in sufficiently to evaluate it on its merits. Hassan Alone says, Eric, you're extra long winded today. Cut the pot. Do you think pot makes me more long winded? I mean, that's a rather wildly arbitrary notion you float there. If you, by long winded, you mean you think I'm speaking more slowly today than normal. Well, if that were the case, and in any case, really, no matter what you mean by it, you'd need to establish that I was smoking more pot than normal to establish that smoking pot linked to whatever phenomenon you're noting here. And I think it would be difficult to articulate reason to believe I'm smoking more pot than normal since I always smoke this much pot. Is that too long-winded a response for you? You seem especially short in your attention span today, Hassan Lone. Maybe you should quit the self-righteousness.
Oh, burn.
Of course, to the extent, probably, I mean, yeah, in most cases. I guess that's what I mean when I say something like that. Or when I said that specific thing, more precisely. What's my favorite film? Well, I've got multiple answers to that question, really. My classic answers that are, say, the answers I put in answer to that question when Blogger asked me of it when I started my Blogger blog many years ago. The answers I put in were Nightmare Before Christmas and The Princess Bride.
Those are good answers.
That's the last time I recall formally answering the question like that in writing. But since that occasion, I've obviously seen many, many movies. I would say one of my all-time favorite movies has got to be Quiz Lady.
Mm-hmm.
A recent one. Quiz Lady is very...
I'm so upset that it wasn't nominated for a Golden Globe. I think that's BS.
Would pot be considered a performance-enhancing drug in the long-winded Olympics? The long-winded Olympics. Well, I would say no. Probably if somebody else like put bioactivated weed concentrate in your water, you could accuse them of sabotaging you. So that would make it the opposite of a performance enhancing drug. Another of my favorite movies, I would say, well, let's segue to my favorite MCU movie, which is among my favorite movies, which is Thor Ragnarok. It's a great film.
been forever since I've seen that.
The Broncos said to Russell Wilson, "Adjust your salary guarantee or get benched." Is this wrong, good business, or both? It's not wrong, but it turned out to be bad business as he called their bluff. Now they've got an extra disgruntled quarterback. They still owe a lot of money to, who's perfectly happy sitting on the bench.
Wow.
So, was it good business? No. Was it wrong? It was, depends on who you deal with in that fashion, right? I don't think really anybody wants to feel forced into concessions on a contract both parties signed. But at the same time, if you imagine your contractor for your house performing dramatically under predicted time frames, etc., you can imagine yourself saying, I promise to pay you this under the agreement that you'd get it done fast. However, there's not anything comparable for a football player because, you know, giving a football player a contract is inherently more risky than saying awarding a contract to a contractor. Because whether the football player is considered doing his job, if they're the quarterback, really, they're supposed to win, but even the best quarterback can't guarantee they're going to win on a bad team. I mean, let's say the Broncos wanted that to happen. If you throw too many shots, then you run out of balls. I suppose that's the equivalent of death to some. What does that mean? What is that referring to? Any thoughts on Russell Wilson's type? I'm thinking he's ESFP or ENFJ, one of the two, because, in part because he really seemed a lot like Pete Carroll during the beginning of his professional career. So that's part of the reason why I thought maybe ENFJ, because I think Pete Carroll's an ENFJ. Is Mission Impossible a good TE film? I mean, it's a film, right? I don't know what would qualify something as a TE film, unless it's like a TE film is how to change your high temperature fuse on your dryer. That's a TE film. I watched that TE film. It was fantastic. One of the best films I've ever seen. The plot was that my high temperature fuses on the dryer were broken, and this video taught me how to fix them. Is your experience with ENFJs positive? Yeah, by and large. I've known a toxic ENFJ who was nevertheless positive in his engagements with people, but in a sort of expressly manipulative way. It took me a while until he really fucked somebody over, and then I realized, okay, this guy is not healthy. All I know is that his teammates see him as sort of corny. This came out in both Seattle and Denver. Not sure how that correlates to type, something FE related. Well, like, come on, guys. I know if we try our hardest, we can win the game. Like that? Kind of corny? Can you guys picture Russell Wilson doing that in the locker room? Yeah. Well, I have one ENFJ who takes human sized shits in my litter box. It's not really my litter box per se, but
The litter box that you clean.
no, Ruben and Acacia, you stay away from that litter box, okay? You need to stay away from it.
Yeah, just stay away from it. Like,
Effie Dom men are particularly annoying for some reason. Well, I don't think that's the case.
no.
I think that individual people are, you're going to find individual people more or less annoying. It is likely to be the case that many of the people you find annoying will end up being one of a couple of types. But it's important to remember that the people you find annoying tells you more about what you value and what you don't value than it does about the people you find annoying. Okay, fair enough, Ruben R. Even though you know, in this household, each man is considered responsible to control and uh, dictate to his woman how she should be all the time. Because I'm a big believer in old fashioned relationships. That's why I'm constantly telling Rachel what to do.
I was listening to this YouTube pick card reading, and it was saying like it had two piles, one for person A and one for person B, and she was like, you know, you can. Person A is going to be you. Person B is going to be your partner. It can be like changed if you feel differently. And it said for you, person B, that you were like extremely youthful and like just like bursting with energy. And I was like, that really is him.
Well, you know, Dat Boy Klaus, I want to point something else. I want to point out somebody else that we might generally think is kind of pretty dorky, actually, and that's Tom Brady, ESFP. Isn't he really rather dorky?
Yeah.
If in fact people feel that way about Russell Wilson, well, they might not have felt that way about Tom Brady because he was winning championships every year, yada yada, and that made his dorkiness just, he was too successful for his dorkiness to be perceived as dorkiness. But with Russell Wilson, he's not won a bunch of Super Bowls, so he's just kind of, he seems like he's past the peak of his career, right? FE Doms are particularly annoying to Hassan Lone, and I will tell you, Hassan Lone, you clearly don't highly prioritize FE, or you wouldn't have made your comment about my long-windedness and your and your totally uh, counterfactual notion that somehow my long-windedness links to my pot smoking. You two got to make a Discord. We can all go there and hear each other. I don't want to make a Discord. Hassan Lone, I said she'd Enneagram 5 beep beep dunk truck, unloading tons of unwanted, unasked for information, lol beep beep. What does that mean?
That
Uh,
it means that 5
does this?
is a knowledge dumper. They're knowledge hoarders, really. And then they dump their knowledge.
Oh, so you're saying Russell Wilson tries to be cool but fails. Brady doesn't try to be cool but is. Okay, well, I get that that's a meaningful distinction to make. Given what you're saying, maybe I think that points more towards FE Dom for Russell Wilson, possibly. You could conceive of a world where Russell Wilson's an ESFJ, I guess. But he sure looked a lot like Pete Carroll during the beginning of his career. I remember seeing an interview with them one time, or with him one time. I was like, oh my God, he sounds exactly like Pete Carroll. That's also kind of an FB Dom thing to do, to latch on to the culture of a team or something and buy in 100%. The ultimate team player. Oh, Eric, I was actually making a joke about the pot, nothing too implicative. Oh, okay. Well, cool. That's online. I wasn't offended by it exactly. I was just I think it was accurate to point it out either way as an instance of something that didn't FE as anticipated. Now, everybody, even the incredibly self-critical INFJ, makes an occasional FE mistake, but so that's not indicative of anything about your type. But I would say that regardless of the fact that it got misinterpreted means it wasn't FE'd adequately ahead of time. You didn't sort of FE think about it enough or something. Whatever you call FE thinking about something. What is a Discord? Discord, no, I don't actively dislike Discord. I've TWFP has had a Discord server before. I found it attracted um, haters and and just a bunch of discord that was totally unproductive. It's like, you get these groups of people in the TWFP Discord, all of whom are just talking shit about how I think I'm right about stuff or whatever. So why do I want to engage those horrible conversations? I hate those conversations. It's like, you know, people challenge certain things, and I feel the need to explain why whatever it is I'm saying withstands scrutiny. In other words, that their challenge is either predicated on something I'm not saying, like in other words, response to somebody, not me, is um, a response to something I've said about the overarching reality of the situation, not anything I've said about relevant content. Like, in other words, his response is something not that I've said about cognitive functions, but something that I've said about me when justifying to somebody who's challenged my professional acumen or something. And I've responded with an accurate, but they understand it as self aggrandizing perspective about something. They start challenging me about stuff I said about me rather than stuff I say about cognitive functions. That just drives me insane. It's like, okay, I get it. You're frustrated by the fact that I'm not agreeing with you that this is sort of an interpretively open, intuition only kind of thing, right? But regardless, you should at least critique what I'm saying about that thing rather than the fact that I'm saying that it's right. The past is past. It's past. It has indeed, Kujitsu. You are wise. Pot does have that effect though, like a story with no ending on. You are articulating just fine. I mean, I think it depends on the individual as to what the impact of marijuana has on them. I know that my friend Dave Porter always said that marijuana made him very quiet and shy. And I've heard a lot of people say that. A lot of people have expressed that they feel paranoid, is the term, which tends to make one, I guess, say less. Certainly, I felt, shy on marijuana before, back when it used to get me high. I would say that's an inverse correlation with long-windedness, but you know, I guess you could say that there's possibly a linkage between speed of speech and marijuana consumption, that marijuana will slow down your rate of speech. That can certainly sometimes be true, but that's not properly described as long-windedness. That's described as slow speech. Now I am. Nobody's ever accused me of being a short-winded guy. Okay. I can carry on for quite some time with my chatter.
Hey, I last. Rachel, how do you experience FI? What do you mean by like experience? Like, how does it play out for me?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'll definitely use my love languages. Like, I'll tell, like, I'll flirt with Eric, and I'll like pet Pee. I say loving things, and I touch Eric a lot and pet him. That's how I experience
tell her to touch me now, like lovers do. What's existential alienation? You feel alienated from existence?
No, it can seem like FE because my FI is demonstrative, so I'll show my love. But
Well, I think Hassan Lone, she's answering the question that she positioned herself, which is, how does it play out? How does my FI play out? That's the question she answered. The question that was asked, Rachel, can you, was not how does it play out, but rather how does FI, whatever,
experience.
how do you experience FI, right?
Yeah.
She's answering the question, how does it play out? And I think the reason for that is revealed by her challenge with the question, how do you experience FI? She's SI8, which is as unconscious as it gets. If I were to answer the question, how do I experience FI? I would say, well, I experience it as tears, as feeling a lump in my throat when I see something on TV that's sad or whatever. I experience it as kind of like this sinking sensation in my chest when I know I'm gonna encounter something kind of sad or disturbing or bothersome or whatever. That's how I experience it. Now, is it because I have a more conscious understanding of my FI? Well, not exactly, even though I just said her, no, it's not because of that, because my FI is less conscious than hers. Hers is 6 slot. Is it because I have a more conscious understanding of SI? Absolutely, because her SI is way less conscious than mine. So when When you ask her what her experience of FI is, you're asking her what's her SI of FI. She's not going to be able to provide you an answer that links to that because it's hard for her to frame things in terms of experiencing them.
Yeah.
So instead, she converts it into what she does to demonstrate her FI.
Yeah.
Or how her FI ends up demonstrating. People who genuinely feel FI demonstrate that FI in a variety of ways, right? Like some FI Dom might silently look at you and you can just feel by, I guess, the quality in their gaze or whatever that they like you or don't like you. But and any communicative type is going to manifest their FI in more, I guess, extroverted ways, regardless of whether they're an introvert or an extrovert. Love is the best escape from existential alienation, and it makes the love very intense because of what the love means by that. I'm FI polar, right? So if it were a question that asked her to articulate related to FI in some way that didn't link to SI, then I suspect she'd better be able to articulate what her experience of FI is. Because what's being asked of her is communication about her experience. She's at a disadvantage inherently over me, who has SI as a conscious function and NI as fifth, so I've got fluency in both. People have fluency in their 4-5. So it's the case that I'll be better able to answer what's my experience of whatever, right? Because that's framing the question in an SI way. The fact that I'm more unconscious about my FI than she is, well, that could be reflected in the fact that when she's talking about FI, she's talking about something she holds precious. When I'm talking about FI, I'm talking about a momentary experience that I have while watching TV. So, which is a more conscious understanding of FI, really. It's what she holds precious and how she behaves accordingly. It's indicative of that status of preciousness she's afforded.
Yes.
Not my momentary experience of tears while watching some Japanese cartoon.
Right. No. Not for me.
I don't think Hassan alone is challenging. I don't think he's challenging my legitimacy at all. Winston's mom. I don't think he's. I don't think he's negating what I'm saying. He's just asking some clarifying questions. The thing is, love is the best escape from existential alienation. I don't know if I feel existentially alienated or not. I'm not quite sure what that means, but do you feel alienated from existence?
No.
What do I feel alienated from or by? Let's see. Well, I guess I felt alienated by the Barbie movie.
That should have made you feel alienated. He was trying to do that.
Yeah, I was trying to make me into a not fully complex human being because of my penis, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps fulfillment of unconscious functions is what gives most fulfillment. I mean, I think that people are most satisfied when they're upholding their first, fifth, third and seventh slot values because those are your absolute values. So, presumably, I should feel very fulfilled right now because I'm extrovertedly intuiting, being ideational in real time. What I'm saying is true, upholds with the truth, and I'm prioritizing those aspects that can be universalized, that are best delegated to communication, or best allotted communicative time. And and it's also the case though that I want to uphold against my FI seventh slot. And I think really when you're most fully actualized, it means you're upholding sufficiently on your 1, 3, and 5, such that you're, whether or not you're upholding on your seventh, you then sort of unlock the capacity of that to even happen when you're upholding on your 1, 3, and 5. The thing is, I'm upholding on my 1, 3, and 5, but I don't really think I'm upholding on my 7 because I think I'm allowing what I want to be too much the same as what I feel like. All right, cool, Winston's mom. So you're actually using TI as a gateway to explain FI? Well, no, when I'm explaining FI, I'm mostly exemplifying it, okay? In those instances, when I'm talking about like how FI plays out for me or how I experience FI, I'm referencing SI experiences that I've identified as instances of FI, and I've shared with you the physical sensation of it and the physical occurrences that happen. So that's a straight up SI FI linkage. But when I'm explaining FI as a subjective deliberation function, that's translating FI into its, and so that I can understand it as in terms of how it's how it's how it's different from other things rather than in terms of what it is. Because I have a difficult time understanding what it is because one, it's my blind spot. Two, I'm SI conscious, so I tend to convert any understanding I have of my polar into the conveniently subjective other epistemology function that I do have conscious. It makes it very difficult for me to understand what it is, to feel like I understand what it is. But I can much better understand what it's not, or understand it by what it's not. And just like I understand the process of subjective deliberation clearly enough because it you can describe it in terms of upholding a criterion that's very distinct from the criterion TI upholds or validates against is a better way to put it, but that is not necessarily exclusive of it, right? So that tells you something informative about the mechanics that what you subjectively want to be true and therefore believe is true, may be the same thing as what I objectively determine to be true and therefore is true. And in that case, there's no disagreement. Just because one party's evaluating something subjectively and the other person's evaluating it objectively doesn't mean they don't agree with each other. Hero Lamb's friend, and ESP says hi, Eric. Hi, Hero Lamb's friend, and welcome to Talking with Famous People.
Welcome to Talking with Famous People.
Where friendship itself is subject to the commutative property. Isn't that nice?
It's nice.
mean, I feel close to both. And I've articulated the distinction plenty of times before between observations, which are claims that come along with it, the additional claim that this ought to be agreed upon, treated as axiomatic, that in order to have a reasonable conversation, we have to agree to not argue about things we both know, everybody knows to be true, like the sun sets in the west. Sure, you could dissemble, you could try to break down your opponent's capacity to argue by setting a bunch of necessary but insufficient burdens, which is essentially what you're doing if you don't agree to observations that you should agree to. But in doing so, you are essentially conceding out the gate that nobody should take your rhetoric seriously because it's purely gamesmanship, right? The thing about rationalizing with empirics, that doesn't link to observation. So when you rationalize with empirics, you're linking to evidence, right? When you have observations, you're saying let's treat this as axiomatic. When you present a deliberative argument, that's like a logical proof, for example, that's going to be predicated on winning the premises and the logic being sound. But you could do a lot of other things too. I tend to want my case making to be deliberative. That is to say, I like working with observations or axioms, and I like to have to win a couple of axiomatic points and let everything else follow logically from that. But it's pretty tough to win an actual debate round with just a bunch of analytics like that. So the thing is, I feel close to using the proper means of epistemology as dictated by the thing in question. Certain things should be evaluated certain ways, certain things should be evaluated other ways. I recognize which ways I'm good at and try to stay in my lane and only evaluate things that are appropriately evaluated that way. Which kinds of things I'm good at but can't like win the argument, like knowing what's good music to listen to or good art to see or whatever, versus things I know I'm at best hit and miss at, like creating arts rather than consuming them. Runs the gamut. Well, Go Man 3, I think the important thing to remember is that we're not talking about theory. What we're talking about is whether or not our understanding of cognitive functions follows from the necessary preconditions to full understanding, or whether it lacks those preconditions. And if you don't know what typology is and what it's doing, namely you're trying to, when you're using if typology, to the extent that typology is worth paying attention to at all, then it needs to understand what it's trying to do so that it can understand the criteria of success it needs to meet in order to attain what it's trying to do. Otherwise, if it doesn't know what it's trying to do, there's no possible way it can successfully do it, right? So whatever you're thinking about typology, if it's not emerged from the fundamental notion that what typology is an attempt to do is an attempt to model human consciousness as a dynamic set of processes in the world across time, right? So Once you understand that that's step one, just as you can't build a house and then at the end put the foundation in, you also can't meaningfully engage in typology intellectually unless you first understand what typology is an attempt to do. So if I try to engage typology by learning from it how I should bait my hook and go fishing, well then I'm 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 approaching the typological questions through a framework that's going to always lead me astray. These two things don't link, right? So if I'm using typology to understand how to better bait my hook in fishing, I'm using the wrong kind of tool for the wrong kind of job. Unless you know what kind of job typology is trying to do, you can't possibly understand how to use the tool well, right? So it's not a matter of being attached to theory. It's an acknowledgement that typology is a lot more like math than it is like astrology. You might say, oh, I don't need to learn algebra, or I don't need to learn geometry, or I don't need to learn this before I do calculus. I'll just jump straight ahead from multiplication and division to calculus. But one way or another, either in the process of learning calculus or in the process or before you begin learning calculus, you're going to have to master all the skill sets that you learn in algebra, right? So as a consequence, we need to make a distinction between things like astrology that are just interpretive, however you want, what they sort of convey to you about a person that you can resonate with or feel good about or whatever. Um, and calculus, which, you know, I've read a lot about the history of algebra, and I've read some books by other people who don't know anything about math at all, about they've written about algebra. And so I believe I can go straight into the calculus class, right? Because uh, this is like astrology, not like math. But it's not like astrology, it's like math. If you don't come in intellectually from the right direction, no matter what you say about it, even if it happens to be correct in isolation, it will only be misleading to you and others. So, when you understand typology first as an attempt to model a dynamic system, dynamic systems within a dynamic system, um, then you progress forward through the necessary and obvious questions that that reality poses. Okay, well, okay, if we're modeling something, we need to have vectors, objects, fields. So, what are the fields? How can we articulate what they might be? Do we have other possible fields? There's a lot of intellectual work that needs to be done, right, before you can meaningfully approach the question. It's not your fault that none of the people whose books you read did meaningful work on the subject. The only person whose book you could have read that did meaningful work on the subject was Jung, and it was incorrect work on the subject, causing ultimately his brilliant idea to get lost in the shuffle of pseudoscience, right? And, we can all have our own perceptions about whether or not we're qualified to take calculus, whether or not we're qualified to teach calculus. Forget about taking calculus. We can all we can all have our own opinions about whether we're qualified to teach calculus or to say informative things about calculus. But hopefully, we encounter some realities that make us wake up a bit and realize, oh shit, I'm like that sign language interpreter at that African funeral. I think I know sign language, but what I'm doing is not sign language. And so now I recognize if I'm going to try to be a sign language interpreter, if I'm going to try to teach calculus, I'm going to need to learn the thing first. But I get it. Like, the analogy may be clear, but you probably still disagree with it. You probably think it, and reasonably so, that it's not possible that your assembled body of research that you've done, the various things you've read, is all counterfeit by the singularity of this truth. Nevertheless, that is the case. Both the case and heretofore well articulated. I mean, just now, well articulated. But I probably should have said just then, perhaps. So, well, now that I realize it's Friday night, I have no lingering thoughts about maybe having something to do tonight, which I had previously. Which makes me wonder if it might not be a terrible idea for me to eat. I don't know if I really want to do that or not. I'm thinking about maybe eating a couple little mushrooms. But, maybe I do. I don't know. That's a challenging question, right? I mean, if you want to call that theorizing, I mean, you can muse about, like, I mean, what any person could conceivably do is describe their experiences with individuals of various types. The problem is, it's very unlikely that whoever you are, you've got people's types right. Either you're typing them yourself, predicated on some understanding of typology other than this one, in which case you've typed them wrong, or they've typed themselves, in which case they probably typed themselves wrong, or you're turning to some place like personality database for typing of a celebrity, which is inherently unreliable because nobody's actually typed those people, etc. So ultimately, it's definitely a necessary prerequisite to responsible, effective musing about the subject, even that you understand the functions correctly, because you can't understand the types except as process analyses. If you're trying to understand them as descriptions, you're trying to make static that which is fundamentally dynamic, and that's never going to work. So let's try not to do that. Anyhow, oh yeah, absolutely, Command 3. You can think about all sorts of stuff without ever thinking about cognitive functions and be very valid in your thinking. You just can't think about personality type without thinking about cognitive functions and be valid in your thinking.
Facts.
Yeah. So have a good night, everybody. I'm gonna call it an evening here. Who knows? It's conceivable I may even live stream again later.